Hi, my name is Sharonda, and I'm a multimedia artist specializing in video. Since it's the holiday season, it's getting towards December and all, I wanted to take some time to discuss my thoughts and opinions on faith-based films and Christian films. In a nutshell, I'm pretty critical of them, and I just wanted to do a little bit of a disclaimer. I do consider myself a Christian. I am a practicing Roman Catholic. There seems to be, especially in a lot of talk about faith-based films and Christian films, if you happen to be critical of them, people think that you're critical of religion in general, and that's not really the case. I'm way more critical about bad filmmaking than I am about Christianity or religion. My biggest criticism about faith-based films and Christian films is that they seem to have this idea that Christian films and faith-based films are a particular niche market, and I don't feel that's the case. And the reason why I don't feel that's the case is because Judeo-Christian value systems, the Judeo-Christian value system is the most dominant culture in the United States. So basically every film out there can be considered a Christian film. If you think about it, there is usually some type of everyman in a lot of films today. That everyman is considered good. The protagonist is considered good because there's this dynamic between good and evil. Sometimes he meets a woman. He has this heteronormative relationship with a woman, and that particular woman has a defined gender role in the film. And the protagonist is fighting some type of antagonist, which is deemed as evil. So there's that dynamic of good and evil, the idea of the chosen one and all of that. That's pretty much in every film that we have. And it's not going away. And you don't see too many filmmakers straying from that particular narrative, because if they did, they wouldn't really make money. You have to appeal to the majority of Americans, and the majority of Americans do hold some type of Judeo-Christian value system. A lot of the films that build themselves as Christian films or faith-based films are just bad. They're just bad films. And there's no way of cutting around it. They're just really bad films. Part of the reason why they're bad films is because they spend too much time focusing on the message of the film and not telling a story. They don't show, they tell. There's all this exposition that happens in all of these films. The films are full of expositions, just everywhere. And the basic filmmaking 101 is you show and don't tell. Film is a visual medium, and a lot of the times those films, they do so much explanation and preaching to the choir that they forget that they're supposed to be films. They're supposed to be entertaining. They're supposed to capture a particular audience. And they just don't work on film levels. Another problem with these films is that they don't tend to agree on the basic tenets of Christianity. A lot of films such as God's Not Dead, War Room, films like that, they are for a narrow audience, and therefore they have a narrow definition of Christianity. And if you don't follow that particular narrative or that particular brand of Christianity, you might feel left out even as a fellow Christian. So you're not going to sit there and watch those films and be engrossed in those films because they're trying to hard sell you a particular message that you just don't agree with, even as a Christian. And that can be problematic. You know, these films are billed as Christian films, but yet all Christians don't agree on what constitute a Christian film. So that's another entirely big problem that Christian and faith-based films have. These films also seem to have a bit of a persecution complex. Again, it's a little disingenuous because Judeo-Christian value system, that's the biggest value system that we have in the United States. That's the predominant culture of the United States. So, films like God's Not Dead, where there always seems to be this persecution, they're judging me because I'm a Christian. It doesn't jive with a lot of the majority of Americans because it just doesn't make any sense. So that's another issue why those films don't do as well as they do. But like I said, Christian films are everywhere. Even a film that you don't think is a Christian film is probably a Christian film. You have films, superhero films, for instance. Superhero films take a lot of liberty with the Jesus story, Jesus allegory story. So Superman is Jesus. He is. Batman is kind of a Jesus, but not quite. Neo is definitely Jesus. So even if you don't think a film is actually Christian film, like I mentioned before, that Judeo-Christian value, that's embedded in the majority of the films that we're going to see, the majority of the mainstream films we're going to see in the United States. What do I think about the label of Christian films or faith-based films in general? Honestly, I feel that that's a money grab. I feel that a lot of films build themselves that way to make money. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but when you're trying to appeal to a certain audience, you're appealing to that, you're not appealing to a wider audience. You're trying to make money, but you're not really making money. You're keeping your films kind of small because you are not following these basic filmmaking techniques. You have all this exposition, you have characters that are two-dimensional or even one-dimensional characters. You have stereotypical characters. You don't have a narrative. You have basically a solvable problem. You have issues like easy conversion. You have cookie cutter belief system within the movie itself. That's not why we watch movies. We watch movies to see interesting characters live out very complex lives. Even if it's something as simple as Superman goes and he fights the bad guy, we are interested in the journey that Superman takes to fight Lex Luthor. That's just how we're built. We love stories. That's what engages us. And that's why the Bible itself is so engaging to a lot of people. The stories that are in the Bible are complex. And it's funny because a lot of Christian-based films or a lot of faith-based films, that's the one area that they don't follow the Bible's lead on, is telling a good story. What do I think is a good film? What do I think are films that are good, that are Christian? Do I have some? I do have some. There's actually a lot of films out there that can be considered Christian films or faith-based films that may not necessarily own up to that definition of faith-based or Christian-based that we associate today, but they, in my opinion, they definitely qualify as Christian films or as faith-based films. And they're just wonderful films. They're wonderful films first, and they happen to just be Christian films, or they just happen to have a Christian subject. My favorite films, and I think the best thing that you can do with films, if you're making a Christian film, is just really follow the Bible. Follow the Bible in narrative structure. Follow the Bible stories. Just seriously, just take any story from the Bible and turn it into a movie, or turn it into just whatever, short story, whatever. Or make it into a modern day allegory of that particular chosen story. Most of the stories in the Bible are very human based, so it's really easy to do. And literally, there are a lot of Christian films out there that just don't do that. They take their own interpretation of whatever their tenets of Christianity happen to be, and then they just run with it. And like I said, that doesn't appeal to all Christians. So it only appeals to a small subset of Christians, and that's the problem. So, taking something like a story out of the Bible will appeal to a wider range of Christians and therefore would make more sense as a Christian film. Some of my favorite Christian films out there, a lot of them, like I said, I like a lot of Bible-based ones. So Prince of Egypt, the 1998 Prince of Egypt animated film. It is beautiful. It's very well acted, very well drawn. It's just a very beautiful film, very humanizing, beautiful film, nice family film as well. Samson and Delilah from the 50s is it's a nice film. King of Kings, Jesus of Nazareth, the miniseries, David and Bathsheba. And I do need to put a caveat with a lot of these films. Some of these films, even though they follow the Bible, they are not necessarily historically accurate. So, for example, one of my favorite Christian films of all time is Quo Vadis from 1951. And it's the United States version in 1951. And it has a scene in it where Christians are going to be fed to lions. And there's not a lot of historical basis for that particular episode. There's all these rumors that Christians were fed to lions. Christians were definitely persecuted in that Roman era, but there's not a lot of evidence that they were actually fed to lions during the reign of Nero. Actually, I think it's Claudius and Quo Vadis, but you get my point. Anyways, another one, Prince of Egypt, there's not a lot of historical basis that Jewish slaves built the pyramids. To be honest, in ancient Egypt, that's not really a task you would give a slave. So, don't let historical accuracy get in the way of telling your story, even to a Christian audience. That might turn some people off, but filmmaking in general, a lot of it skirts historical accuracy for the narrative. And, for the most part, most people understand that and they just go with it. So even though the feeding of the lions may not be historically accurate, it is damn good filmmaking. So, sometimes you do have to take that risk. And I'm saying that as a huge historical buff. I love history. But I'm perfectly fine with that. Stories that are closer to modern day issues would be something like Beckett, or Man of All Seasons. Beckett is, both Beckett and A Man of All Seasons are both movies that focus on church and state issues. Beckett is talking about Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, who's considered a saint with the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, I believe. Becket and his conflict with King Henry II of England. And A Man of All Seasons is about Thomas More, also considered a saint, and Henry VIII of England. So they're very similar stories in that regard, but they're very good. So be sure to check those out. Also, Ten Commandments, both versions of the Ten Commandments. There's the 1923 version, which is silent, and the 1956 version. They're both by DeMille. They're excellent films. You also have films like, The Robe is passable. It's okay. Greatest Story Ever Told is another great movie. Ben-Hur, obviously. The first and second Ben-Hur, not the not the one that came out recently, but the one from the silent era and the one that's the most famous one. Those are considered probably the best Christian films out there. You also have films like The Flowers of St. Francis, that's written by Rossellini and Fellini. Anything that's Fellini, filmmakers just go gaga for. So that would be a really good treat for anybody who is a film buff, is to watch something like The Flowers of St. Francis, which has a Fellini feel to it. Martin Luther from 1953. A more modern movie would be Selma, which is a really good Christian film. So, there's plenty of films out there. It's a Wonderful Life, obviously. Frank Capra was a very devout Catholic, and a lot of the movies that he did had that element in there. He was really inspired by his faith, and the most famous of which was It's a Wonderful Life. It seems simple, and most people criticize it as being simple, but it's a far more complex film than people realize. Just one of the good things to do is to definitely check out silent era movies. Silent era movies, they definitely show and not tell. So if you are a filmmaker who is interested in making faith-based films or interested in making Christian films, definitely check out silent era movies like the original Ten Commandments, the original Ben-Hur, and one of my big favorites, one of the best silent films of all time, was The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is a French film in the 1920s. That film is beautiful. It's has a lot of lovely early Isotinian montage to it. Just check it out. It's very beautiful. Also, just as a side note, a lot of films that are catered to African American audiences are going to have elements of faith in them, even if they're not considered Christian per se. The reason being is because with African Americans, such as myself, faith is more part of our culture. So you're going to have films like The Color Purple and Soul Food that definitely touch on Christian values and that Judeo-Christian values set. They're not necessarily considered faith-based films, but, Soul Food definitely has elements of stuff like forgiveness in there, which is a very big Christian value. So, African American films are good films to start with as well. You can also check out filmmakers who don't necessarily make so-called Christian-based films, but definitely have elements of faith in their films. That would include people like director John Ford, director Kevin Smith, director Alfred Hitchcock. All three of those are very devout Catholics, and their work, even though they don't make so-called Christian films, there are elements of Christianity in all of those. Like, for instance, with Alfred Hitchcock, he directed the movie I Confess with Montgomery Clift in there. So they're very influenced by their faith, and they definitely use their faith to solve or to talk about certain issues that happen in our day-to-day lives. So films by John Ford and Hitchcock and Capra and Smith, they're all worthy of checking out. Also, I do feel that sometimes we as Christians sometimes are critical of films that seem like on the surface they might be critical of basic religion or the tenets that we hold. And I say that those films are excellent to check out as well. Films like that would include Jesus Christ Superstar, The Last Temptation of Christ, Doubt, Dogma, made by Kevin Smith. I think those films are really worth checking out because if you're a Christian, it kind of opens up a new world for you, just kind of getting out of that little bubble that you live in and getting into the more philosophical and cerebral side of your faith. So if you are that type of person that is really into apologetics, really into just finding out all the different things about faith, different arguments about faith, definitely check out movies such as Last Temptation of Christ and Doubt. They're really great movies. So basically that's it. I really feel that some of the films today, they think that the critics don't matter. The critics do matter. And the reason why the critics are so harsh on them is because they failed filmmaking 101. They're not they're movies that appeal to the simplistic, and they don't build on that. They don't aspire to be better films. So that's why I have a huge problem with a lot of the so-called faith-based films that are labeled as such today. So anyways, that's my take, and I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas or a Happy Holidays, whichever you prefer. Thanks for watching.